All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Gwen Callahan. I am the director of the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in CthulhuCon. And this is a panel discussion on representation and cosmic horror, which is one of the parts of CthulhuCon. We have some author readings and filmmaker discussions and things like that. So welcome. I am so honored to be joined tonight by Amber Snyder, whose film Evermore, Nevermore will be playing right before the Fall of Usher on Saturday night. Jathan Lamar, who is the writer and director of A Whole Snack, which is showing in Friday night shorts, and Dadrian Flavors, the writer and director of A Drink to Puerto Rico, that I believe, is playing on Sunday. Apologies, I don't have the entire schedule memorized, but I think your film's playing Sunday. So, thank you for joining me. This is a topic that maybe gets covered often in literary circles and sometimes film festivals, and I think it's become more of a focus in our circles in the Lovecraft fandom and cosmic horror genre, um, because of let's just address the elephant in the room. H.P. Lovecraft, our film festival is named after him. We are all inspired by him, but he was racist. And it's sometimes a hard thing to reconcile with being a person of color or a woman or a population that wasn't exactly uplifted and honored by a writer who inspired a lot of work. But I think that it's important to know that about him, but it's also important not to let that hold us back when we're making our own art. So I'm interested to know from each of you if you're a Lovecraft fan, and B, if how that affects your work, like what that brings into your work.
I guess I
Sorry.
can start. Uh, um, Not particularly a Lovecraft fan like myself, but I love horror. I love horror. I love sci-fi, and as we all know, they come in many shapes and forms, and so for me, it's as a writer, aspiring writer and director, I'm just always looking for those seeds of inspiration and kind of leaning into my sensibilities and the things that I like when I'm going out to make something. And so, I think traditionally, as we're going to get into on this Zoom, is that you know minority filmmaking has traditionally been kind of pigeonholed to certain forms of storytelling. I think especially in Black cinema, when we're thinking about you know the hood or gangster stories, or it's like the very traditional comedies where we have to be very like self-deprecating, for lack of a better term. And so but that's not kind of the representative of like the holistic view of like what Black interests are. It's like I grew up as someone who I grew up loving comic books and watching Star Wars and watching Night of the Living Dead, and Alien is one of my favorite franchises. And so it's like when I think about storytelling, it's always through this very, I guess what I would say is like a peculiar lens in terms of like Black representation in film and storytelling. And so it's good to see that we're seeing the doors kind of opening, not only in cosmic horror but just in storytelling in general. And you have creators like Jordan Peele, who is really pushing the envelope. You have Misha Green, who's obviously did Lovecraft Country, who's kind of pushing the envelope, and you have just other creators really looking to kind of put their stamp on the genre. And so for me as an up and coming filmmaker, it's exciting to be able to kind of share spaces like this with other aspiring filmmakers who are putting representation kind of at the forefront of their storytelling. It's awesome. And so I think sure I speak for the group, but we aren't approaching this story looking at being like, oh, we have to be diverse, but it's just through the natural lens of like how we see the world. That's how we kind of tell stories. And so that's kind of my take on
Amber, go ahead.
Yeah. I love everything you said there. I'll piggyback all that. H.P. Lovecraft, I was first introduced through the podcast Night Vale. And then from there, like there's a few movies based off of H.P. Lovecraft that definitely told me that HP is all about being weird, which I love, thinking outside the box. But yeah, as far as the horror genre, like as a white woman, as a queer woman, it's nice to see that slowly changing. I've definitely been to probably every film festival I've been to where they bring all the directors up on stage after the horror shorts. They're all white males, which I knew it was the case, but then when I was there, I was like, oh wow, I didn't. It's still like really, really is a problem. Okay, so it's so yeah, I think a change is happening, which is good. I think it's just a matter of women like myself just like stepping into a room and being like, I can do that. Because I feel like I've definitely felt like people don't believe I can be dark and scary. Because I think there's something about women can be brought up to like, you shouldn't think that way or want to be creative that way. You're a woman. And it's like, no, I could scare you pretty good if you just let me. Like, I have dark stories as well. And yeah, I appreciate seeing stories in a different lens for sure. And more of that, please. So being part of that is really important to me as well.
Nice. I was going to say one of the most chilling horror stories around is The Haunting of Hill House. And
Mm.
no, that was written by a woman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Well, and like the writer director of The Babadook and also Nightingale. Nightingale is more like drama, but it's also horror too, because there's just a lot of gruesomeness in it. But that story is based off of real Australian history, and then and it's dark, but I think yeah, it's just proof that you should give people a chance. You have no idea what they're going to bring to the table, and yeah.
How about you, Dadrian?
Yeah, no, I agree with Amber and Jathan largely. I was a bit of a Lovecraft fan growing up. I think I read At the Mountains of Madness when I was 14 or 15, and I've seen a lot of things. It's been more interesting seeing how much film and cinema were influenced by his ideas, like Animator and all the other just bizarre ideas from The Thing in John Carpenter's flick. And what's fascinating to me is seeing this chance for more diverse people to actually add our perspective to that sort of style of horror and just kind of bust it into something new. So that's what that's what I was trying to do with my short. I think that's what everybody was trying to do, try and ingrain their perspective with this thing that's already been a major part of horror stories for decades, but it's largely dominated by white men from their perspective.
For me, it's interesting when I encounter, it seems like boys or men, a lot of male storytellers have encountered Lovecraft in an adolescence, and that seems to be like a very formative, foundational influence for them. And I think part of it is because of this taking on the otherness of, in his stories. There's the hybrid people who are breeding with fish, like the deep ones in Shadow over Innsmouth, and these things that are to be feared, but also he spends a lot of time thinking about them. And I think as teenagers, because we all go through these crazy hormonal changes where you're like, I don't recognize this body anymore, and you feel like no one understands you, you feel like you don't belong anywhere. And so I think that's an age where you deeply connect with, a lot of the elements in Lovecraft's writing. But it also seems to me like there's so many like white male filmmakers making Lovecraftian and cosmic horror movies, when really I think that people of color, women, anyone who's marginalized really has kind of a deeper understanding of like what that otherness is all about. So for me, it's really exciting to see more and more, BIPOC filmmakers, women filmmakers, filmmakers of color telling these stories from their own point of view, because it does bring something really fresh to the material and to the genre. And it also, I think, helps to reframe our ideas about what, as Jathan said, what kind of stories that we should be telling because of who we are. Do any of you have thoughts about that topic? just jump right in. Go ahead. Or let me reframe that question. For you, in making this film, do you feel like you brought something to it because of who you are? Obviously, you're going to tell a story the way that you tell it. But I'm interested to get your thoughts on how you approached the subject matter and how you think it might be different from a white filmmaker.
So I know personally with Drink to Puerto Rico, I had approached a pair of my friends. I'm not Puerto Rican, but they are. And we just really had this whole back and forth on what our childhood, and particularly what Christmas and interacting with our parents was like. Because I feel like there's something similar, I think, with everybody's childhood, in pretty much every culture. It's just there are specifics, and weirdly enough, being really specific about how your culture does this ends up making it more relatable to somebody else's. So that was sort of our focus in trying to just figure out by our differences what make us not necessarily the same, but relatable.
I would say for my piece, which is an adaptation on Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, I grew up really enjoying Edgar Allan Poe, and he wasn't even the reason why I did it. I was really dissecting grief and how grief comes up in different ways, in death and in relationships, and and then it was like, oh, but I have control, so Poe doesn't have to be a man, it can be a woman. It's her name is Poe, and I actually originally wrote it to be a non-binary character, but then the original actor that I had for that could not do it. But still, like, it was an opportunity to see myself in the work, because that was such a thing growing up, is that I was even talking to a 5-year-old today, because I'm an after school teacher, and we were watching a video, and there was a white man demonstrating a drum, and she was like, can you go back to the one where there's girls? And I was like, because you want to see yourself in it. I understand, like, you want it to reflect you. And she was like, yeah. I was like, duh, I know. So it was nice. It was exciting to take Edgar Allan Poe's work and then, like, see myself in it. And also provide that to someone else, because while I respect Edgar Allan Poe, like, I was always wishing there was a scary story where the lead character was someone like me. So I did it, and here it is. But yeah.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, the approach to the story was heavily inspired by Edgar Wright. He's one of my, favorite directors, filmmakers. I just love his style and his pacing, and just like this kinetic energy that he brings into film. Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz is probably one of my favorite movies. But then again, just this love of horror, like this blend of like horror and comedy was really the intersection that I wanted to explore. And when I just think across just the landscape of cinema, there just aren't many films that feature Black leads in those type of roles. And so it just leaned into my natural sensibilities and what I love. And I wanted to put someone who looked like me in front and center in this type of story. But it's funny enough, I think I mentioned this at the fest, is for the longest time I was really holding out for a Black female lead as well, because I wanted a majority Black cast. And I went through several rounds of casting, trying to find the right person. And Rawan, who is the female lead, is not Black. She is Middle Eastern, but just carries this kind of natural mystique and otherworldly energy about her that, she completely just kind of owned the role in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And so, but the intent there was to really just kind of make this hybrid horror comedy that I didn't really necessarily see in Black cinema, and really just using this as an opportunity to not only put my stamp on how I see the world, but just try to widen the gaze a little bit in terms of like Black storytelling. So
Nice. I really appreciated too that the lead character is not only a Black leading man, but he's also physically not what you typically see in a leading role. And then people have probably seen the synopsis for this film, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything here, but making him a sexual being was really nice to see too, like giving him that space to fill, as well as like you don't have to just be funny in this
right.
film. Like you can be the lead and a sexual being and also be funny.
Yeah, that was we definitely, it was funny that you even say that, because we, were it was we were I was trying to be very careful, because I think it's a fine line between, you know, doing the part justice and making sure that we weren't making fun of obesity, in a story that's called A Whole Snack, that it ultimately is about food, in multiple shapes and forms. And so when we were casting, I knew I wanted a particular type of actor. And Jerry was kind of, really pushing the envelope in terms of what I felt could be deemed insensitive, because I knew that I was going to have, taking the shirt off and scenes of intimacy where, to your point, Gwen, like we were kind of sexualizing the character to an extent. And so, my team and I, we took extra precaution to make sure that he felt comfortable. I did multiple reads of the script with people that were close, and just making, and that who I knew would kind of give it to me straight, whether they felt like I was being insensitive or not, because that was the last thing that we wanted to do. And so Jerry just has this charismatic charm that just pulls you in, and all of the biases or insensitivities kind of wash away. And I think because he trusted us with the decisions that we were making, in terms of my producers, co-writer, and then myself as a director, he felt really comfortable. We I was like pushing him to be honest with me, of like, dude, like if you're not comfortable, please let me know, because I want to have that conversation and be transparent. But he was, he loved the character, he loved the role, he was very appreciative in how we approached certain scenes, and I couldn't have asked for a better actor.
He brings like a really like I never felt like you were making fun of him in the film, so good on you for accomplishing that. And I think part of that is to his credit, that as an actor his performance was self-assured, and like he never questioned that this was happening for real. So we as I as an audience member didn't really question it too much either. So I think that all worked out really well. It's handled well. For Amber and Dadrian, when you're making films, that kind of thing, where I mean, we just talked about how you have to be careful about presenting something in a way that doesn't seem like you're making fun of it or exploiting it in a certain way. Has that come into play in the films that you've been making?
I'd say with A Drink to Puerto Rico, as I'm not Puerto Rican, there was a bit of a tightrope to walk in terms of not wanting to feel exploitative of someone else's culture, and not wanting to kind of become overbearing with the idea of sort of insular fights that kind of happen inside of specific groups. I mean, like Black people and Afro-Latino people and Indian people have a large swath of colorism that goes on inside the communities. And there's a good amount of that in Puerto Rico as well. And I wanted to find a way to broach that subject and talk about how these small things that separate us, especially inside communities that really need to come together, aren't as big as it feels culturally at the time. And that's sort of the overarching thing of the story. But that was probably the one thing that I kind of went back and forth with my leads a lot on, just to make sure I'm like, I don't want any of this to feel anything at all unnatural. And we'd had those discussions before, and I'd been part of other Puerto Rican groups who were having those discussions, and just trying to find that right balance of not picking apart or criticizing a culture for what they're doing, but that we just need to have the conversations.
For me, I haven't really had the opportunity to do those type of stories where it would borderline that. The only thing I could add is I've co-curated shows that were specifically for queer women, and so along that same route of like just creating content that isn't just about like coming out stories and stuff. Like with the short Evermore Nevermore, it's not like I'm constantly reminding you that this is a gay character. Like it's treated as very like, this is normal, this is, you just, yeah. So I hope to continue doing that and sharing that lens that way, where it's not like, just saying that someone's gay, where we can just treat it just like everything else, where it's like, and this is the story, and they live a similar life like we do. Like they're not other, they're humans. We're all humans. Yeah.
I love that answer, by the way.
Yeah. And I like that the point of it is not that the character's gay. Like this is the story, and this is the character happens to be gay. And then, right. But the story is the important thing. And We've been getting more films like that, which is really exciting too, where it doesn't have to be the point of the film that this character is Black or this character is Puerto Rican or this character is gay. It's just another facet of what they are. Like they happen to be wearing a blue shirt, or their hair is brown.
Right. Yeah.
So for each of you, I'm curious about like who your role model filmmakers are, and it doesn't have to be related to representation or breaking ground, but I'm just curious about what kind of things you feed yourself when you are doing research, or like just what you enjoy watching.
Spike Lee, one of the all times for me, absolutely. Edgar Wright, as I mentioned, David Fincher, Steven Spielberg. I mean, I'm like coming of age stories and just like going on those types of adventures. Like that's why I go to the movies. It's like I want to escape and just be transported somewhere else. I think I say Christopher Nolan. Memento is one of my favorite films. Loving, what Jordan Peele is doing right now. Coogler. There's like so many. It's like, I love each of them for different reasons. It's kind of hard to pick and choose, but if I had to kind of whittle it down to my top three, it's probably Spielberg, Fincher, and Spike Lee.
How about you, Dadrian?
I've also been really enjoying Jordan Peele's recent stuff, but I was always big into James Gunn. I also love Edgar Wright. I actually have I've gone to 2 different symposiums on Scott Pilgrim versus the World, so he does some amazing work. And I think Ridley Scott sticks out a lot for me, despite sort of the track record he's had for the last few years. I was a big fan of his, and I think Denis Villeneuve is really coming around for me. I really like the new Dune. It's pretty amazing.
For me, so I've come into filmmaking later in my life. I'm 36, and like I think a big turning point for me was learning about Alice Guy Blanchet, who was the first female filmmaker. She was there when the first cinematograph was invented. And so she was a real trailblazer as far as like being a woman at that time in France and just like taking that camera and really running with it and creating stories. But now, present day would be Lynn Shelton, who passed away last year, but she is another woman who she was an editor for a long time, and then she got into being a film director later in her life as well. And like, I love that her stories are very like raw, and also like stories that you're like, this couldn't have possibly happened, but they're exactly the stories that do happen. They just don't get the big screen enough. Like, everybody's got skeletons in their closet. And I think the more we see of that, the better we can all come together, because there's a lot of fantasy in Hollywood movies. And so Lynn Shelton was not about that. She was about the raw and the dirty, which is so much more interesting anyway. So I've definitely been looking up to her a lot in the last few years.
Nice.
And I also want to revise. I want to revise and replace Fincher. I love Fincher, but I got to replace Fincher with Tarantino. I can't believe that I didn't initially mention Quentin Tarantino. Like, that man's style of filmmaking is like, so, like, I aspire to like make film like that.
For adding addendums, of course, I'd also like to add Wes Craven, since I grew up on the old 80s slashers. So that was, between that and Scream, the guy just really did it for me growing up.
Nice. So there's a question in Discord for everyone, and the question is: how do you feel Lovecraft Country has impacted the conversation over the last year? First of all, have you all seen Lovecraft Country? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like, that's an interesting question, because there's been a lot of focus on Black filmmakers and Lovecraft for I guess the same reason that we're having this panel. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you feel that has impacted the overall conversation.
I mean, I'd say from jump, probably the fact that it actually brought into the conversation the bombing in Oklahoma, which just wasn't spoken about. I had no idea of the historical significance about it. I'd heard of Black Wall Street, and I knew there was a bombing, but it was so downplayed compared to the actual horror of what occurred, that it was kind of amazing seeing that put to film as a first, instead of even really hearing about it as a story. So I think that was pretty monumental, that between that and Watchmen, that's how most of the world heard about a major act in American history.
Yeah, I think it really pushed just Lovecraftian storytelling kind of into the forefront, just into the pop culture zeitgeist, I guess, for lack of a better term. I loved this. I thought the series had incredible moments. I felt like as a season, it was a bit uneven, but I think some of the episodes were just like, oh my God, this is incredible. And just, as you mentioned at the top of, this panel, is, not shying away from the fact that Lovecraft was a racist, you know what I mean? That he wasn't someone that really cared to give minorities space or voice, in his storytelling. And so to kind of take that fact and take his work and kind of flip it on its head in a way that respected the ideas and the monsters, and just kind of the love that you have for the genre, that he had for the genre, and then weave that in a story of like the horrors of racism as well. Just that duality, I thought was incredible, and I thought they did a really great job in with certain episodes and kind of how they towed that line. And so I just think it just kind of catapulted just the name, like the style of filmmaking and storytelling kind of into pop culture zeitgeist, where perhaps maybe it was a little bit more niche before Lovecraft. So yeah.
I feel like it had the same, it's the same turning point as when Hamilton the musical came out, where it was like, look at history this way. And then like Lovecraft Country came out, and like it created, like Hamilton created conversations, Lovecraft Country created conversations. And like there's this PDF that I believe the company made, where it's like you can follow the PDF along as you watch the show, and it checks off like this part of history, and this, yes, this did happen, you know. So like I feel like a lot of people were having conversations of like, could you believe in that episode, like that really happened? Because, you know, I came from Texas. We definitely didn't learn enough of real history. So like, I know people I grew up with would watch that show and have their minds blown. But it's like I feel like there's more of that coming, especially with Jordan Peele, where it's like, yeah, now that we've brought this up, let's talk about it because this is real. And I love that horror kind of opens that door because it pulls you in because you're there for the horror, for that feeling of being scared or whatever. But then also that's how it catches you and gets you to listen and be like, oh, and by the way. So I'm so excited for more of that to happen because people were suddenly very much listening and wanting to talk about these things. So
Absolutely. For me, something that was comforting about the show was that it did talk about Lovecraft's racism, but I feel like at the same time it was saying, you know, it's okay to like Lovecraft's stories. You know, we don't exalt or, you know, hold up his personal beliefs about other races to, you know, as the standard, but you know, he wrote about all these things. And now everyone is able to kind of use those story elements in their own storytelling and make them into something else. So for me, I feel like there's a shift in our attitude about like who's allowed to tell what kind of stories. And I note that Dadrian and Jathan, you guys seem to be like science fiction, horror, fantasy nerds. Not nerds, but you're fans of the horror and science fiction and fantasy genres, and those again tend to be dominated. It's a white dominated space, and I'm wondering, when you were younger, was it hard? Did you have peers that were um like friends and fans of the same things as you that were also Black, or were most of your friends that were into that white people? Or I'm just curious about what your experience is with those genres.
I will accept the title of nerd. But growing up, no, actually, I was definitely the odd friend, you know, who was like reading the X-Men comic books, like freaking out over Star Wars and, you know, just my fandom for sci-fi and horror in that way. And so, you know, funny enough, I try to suppress some of the glee just so I could like not be joked on or clowned by my friends who probably at the time thought it was a little bit like nerd wasn't like nerd. Being a nerd now is cool. Being a nerd then like wasn't, you know what I mean? Like you don't want to face that kind of scrutiny, you know, as a kid. And so, you know, I would suppress some of that. So no, I feel like it really didn't start connecting for me until, you know, similar to what, you know, Amber said later when I started just, you know, expanding my worldview, meeting way more people, going from the neighborhood in Minneapolis, which is where I grew up, to, you know, moving out to LA and just kind of having my mind blown by just this huge multicultural mega city where it's just ideas and interests and tastes and sensibilities kind of flowing in from every direction. And, you know, I started to see really quick that like, oh, I'm not the only one. But you know, kind of growing up, I didn't feel like I had many peers that were kind of into those things like I was.
I'll also accept my nerd crown in this in science fiction and horror. I suppose I grew up mostly in southern suburbs, so there was a bit of a multicultural tinge, but largely it was dominated by most of my peers being white. And it's so that was a good part of my circle, especially in science fiction. But strangely, it was always my family and my extended family. I've got a huge extended family. I think I've got 41 cousins. So it was hanging out with them is where I got more of my horror push, where we'd watch Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street. And that was sort of like our thing. Whenever all the cousins get together, we'd sit down and watch horror movies. So I think it ended up being an interesting blend. I think I ended up pulling from a little bit of both, where it's like a bunch of Southern kids in Alabama sitting around a TV in my grandmother's back room and just watching Halloween and scaring the crap out of each other.
And Amber, because you so you're very interested in stories that are a little more gritty and horror, but you're a horror fan. And growing up, did you have other girlfriends that were horror fans too, or was it mostly like boys that were your compatriots?
Yeah, I always tended to have more guy friends than girlfriends. But then I've got my small group of girlfriends that are into horror, and because when you find them, you're like, you're mine forever. But yeah, so every year since college, I've hosted Sinister Cinema wherever I'm living. And I've done like 5 days before Halloween, we watch a horror movie every night, or we're going to watch 5 movies in one night. So like, yeah, I love horror, and I also love being able to show people the movies that I feel like you have to know this movie and see this horror movie. Cause I feel like a lot of my friends think horror genre, it's so like, depends on the person, but like they think that it's all like the Chucky doll, or it's all blood and gore. And I'm like, no. There's some like really great trippy things that make you like think and also freak you out, which is so much better, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah. So that's me in horror.
I will note that horror is the only genre that I'm aware of that now has a category, a subgenre that's prestige. Like every other genre, like science, there's not prestige science fiction or prestige drama or prestige historical drama.
Right. Yeah.
But we have prestige horror for some reason.
I've never heard of that. I'm new to that. So what does that mean exactly?
So things like Hereditary or
okay. That's where I first went with Ari Aster.
And I think maybe it's just horror trying to rebrand itself, but it is.
Well, and Ari Aster calls his movies comedies, so
yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And full disclosure to the other geeks and nerds out there that Brian often points out that I used to be the queen of the nerds because I was actually the board president for the Portland Geek Council here in Portland. So
nice.
Yeah, guilty. But do any of you have any thoughts that you'd like to share before we kind of wrap this up? Checking the Discord to see if there's other questions. But yeah, if you have any other things that you'd like to share.
I just want to say I'm excited to see both of your films, like Dadrian, Amber. I didn't get a chance to see them. I was actually in Portland for the in-person fest, but I did not get a chance to see either of your films. But just being in this space, hearing you guys talk about your craft and just your point of view on storytelling, can't wait to check them out.
Same. I'm very excited. I always love having these conversations because it really does get you pumped about like, okay, now I want to see what this human has created because it sounds awesome.
Agreed. Yeah.
And also just to say, if anybody's watching this outside of us, that it's never too late to switch your career and try something new. And you can do it on a budget. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it because you have to have tons of money. We have really great cameras on our phones, and yeah, so don't give up.
Excellent point.
And that's a question I have for each of you. Do you have a day job, or is filmmaking your day job?
I have a day job. After, as I said earlier, I'm an after-school teacher, so yeah.
I definitely have a day job. I'm a creative director at the Walt Disney Company.
I too have a day job, though my day job is also making movies. So I just work on other people's movies. I'm a VFX producer and occasionally storyboard coordinator and a bunch of other things.
Nice.
Well, with that, I don't think there was a comment in the chat that they were just enjoying the chat here. And I guess let's end on a fun note, like recommend a movie to me and our audience that you think should really be seen, that maybe is underrated, or that that features an underrated or marginalized people.
Put us
I'll
on
give you all a
the
second.
spot. Ooh, Kennedy, does it have to be
maybe I should go
horror?
first. It has to. It would preferably horror, but
Okay.
here, I'll go first. So this is, I don't know that everyone needs to see this, but I think people will want to see this, and it's a fun movie to see if you can find it. But Abby, which is kind of billed as the Black Exorcist, has like an all Black cast basically. It was directed by William Girdler, who is not Black, but and it's kind of I think he was trying to piggyback on that blaxploitation genre. But when you watch it, it's actually very interesting. Like the acting is all really good, the script is decent, and I was really surprised by how not lampoonish it was, and how kind of straightforward a story it was actually. So there you go, Abby by William Girdler. Go watch it.
I'm gonna watch it.
I feel like everybody's seen this, but I'm just gonna throw it out in the hopes that maybe they haven't. But Wes Craven's People Under the Stairs.
Love that one.
Yeah, oddly enough, I was gonna go with Wes Craven's Vampire in Brooklyn, which
Ooh.
I went back and watched that, and I was surprised by how not exploitation and ridiculous it really was. Like they had a comedic character, but the movie itself wasn't actually very funny. They were trying to make a serious horror movie, and it succeeds and fails in different measures, but it's interesting as an exercise, I thought.
First thing that comes to mind, I've already said it, but I still meet people that have not seen it, and that's The Babadook. Like, you have to see, and it's just such, I think it's, in my mind, the perfect horror film without giving you nightmares, because the ending is such a perfect like bookend ending of like, oh, this story is about yeah, and it does have creepy elements, but I wasn't scared at the end, which I like being scared, but I really appreciated that there was this deeper meaning behind it, and you weren't going to get it to the very end. So you had to go on the ride. And then once you got there, I don't know, you just felt really full by the end.
So actually there's one more question for all of us. Lilith B has asked in the Discord server, are there elements of horror that you find less or more scary viewed from outside demographics most often represented? So to put words in their mouth, I think what they're asking is, are there things in horror movies that you find more scary or less scary than like the average white demographic because of who you are as a woman, as a gay person, as a Black man?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if mine is necessarily like because I'm Black, but like I can do monsters, slashers, like demonic possession, like anything in like more of like the spirit realm, definitely checks a different nerve on the fear factor scale for me. But that's probably my one.
Okay.
Yeah, I suppose on mine, it's an element that'll pop up from time to time, and it's not too prevalent, but it's when there are like crooked cops that will murder or completely dismiss someone. Like that's a deep-seated fear for me for some, like I mean, for an obvious reason, but it's just that always gets to me.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not sure. Can you reword the question again? Because I had a thought and then I lost it.
So are there elements in horror movies that you find more scary than you, like say the straight girl next to you would find scary,
Right.
or less scary because of who you are?
Yeah. I think I've come across queer people in my life that have shared before they came out the torture that they went through. A friend of mine, and this actually fed into my short Nevermore. He experienced sleep paralysis and saw shadow people, and it wasn't until he came out to his family that they went away. So it's like that story, I think, is so specific and creepy, and that's where putting the lens on that is really important, because I don't think a straight person, maybe, I mean, they could have moments of oppression or something, but like I didn't come across that until I met my friend, and I found it very eye-opening. So yeah, that paranormal, the darkness that we don't talk about, those type of things, I think can be very scary from people that are experiencing oppression. Like it's a certain type of darkness that needs to be shared more, because it's there for a reason.
Cool. Well, excellent. Thank you all so much. I think we're going to leave it on that note. Tell us where we can find you on social media or learn more about your film. Go ahead, Amber.
Yeah, I am at ambersnyder.com. And I'm also a creator of a show for young people called The Eclipse Show, which is on YouTube. But yeah, those are the two main places where you can find me and what I'm up to in the filming world.
Excellent. And Jathan, where can we find you online?
You can find my Instagram is just my name at Jathan, Jathan. My avatar is currently Kobe Bryant. So if you're looking for the face, you're going to just get a picture of Kobe. And then the social handle for the film, A Whole Snack, is just at A Whole Snack Film. Yeah.
And Dadrian.
So my Instagram and Twitter handle are the same. It's Dadrian_Flavors. And there you can kind of find, on Instagram, you can find my that kind of connects to a few other sites I've got up and running, but I don't have anything up and running for A Drink to Puerto Rico yet.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being with me and for being so much more eloquent than me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that the audience got something useful out of it as well. Amber's film, Evermore Nevermore, once again is going to be playing Saturday night right before the Fall of Usher. Jathan's film, A Whole Snack, is in tonight's shorts block, which you can still see. Everything's available until October 12th. And Dadrian's film, A Drink to Puerto Rico, is playing on Sunday in the shorts. So check those out and hop on the Discord server. People will be chatting there all weekend. If you guys pop in, just introduce yourselves, and people will always ask questions about things. So we hope to see more of you. Thanks, everyone. Hope you're having a good time watching all the films, and we will see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Good luck, everybody out there aspiring to make films. Amber, Dadrian, looking forward to seeing your work. And Gwen, you've been an excellent host. Could not give you enough roses and flowers of appreciation. Thanks all.
Oh, thank you.
Yay.
So hang out, and Brian will.